Hello Rustbags, it's Jade. Welcome to a Rust video today. 101 things you need to know about Rust in 2021, specifically for console fans. Rust has been around for nearly 8 years now, and of course it's had loads of changes. Trying to find out information about this game sometimes is a minefield, working out whether or not it's from legacy, PC or console only. Everything I'm mentioning right now is strictly for the console versions. Really designed for you noobs out there, you beach bobs, you absolute nakeds that haven't got a clue about Rust. You may be wondering whether or not you should pick it up or whether it's going to be the game for you. This video is going to explain what Rust is, crafting, resources, PvP, base building, monuments, the map, and a lot more. It's not a tips guide to how to get the best base in the first day or to be an absolute chad. It's simply to explain all the features that you might need to know about Rust coming to console. I've broke it down into sort of sections or chapters, so hopefully you can skip some of the stuff if you already know about how the game has formed and some of the stuff with servers. But otherwise, enjoy it. Please like, make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment with your top tip, absolute essential tip for Rust. And let's go. Double 11 are the team in charge of the port to consoles, working hand in hand with Facepunch, but they are the main developers of this game. Supposedly working on it for the last 3 years. It's going to be available on Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, and it will be backwards compatible with next gen, with no news yet about whether or not a next gen upgrade will be free at some point in the future or whether or not it's going to be paid. There's various editions of Rust on console that came with either pre-order bonuses, extra skins or access to the test servers. I personally think, as you guys maybe know by now, that this is kind of bullshit, but it's there if you want it. The skins store is going to be available on console at some point, and it doesn't look likely though they're going to have Twitch drops integrated right now, but they have said it might be something they look into in the future. Rust is a completely online experience. There is no single player world and you can only play on the official servers at the moment, with community servers some way off. You also need PlayStation Plus and Xbox Live to play. As far as we know, the community servers are going to be a way away, and they're only going to support up to 50 players instead of the hundreds that you can find on official servers at the moment. Subsets change, but it does look like they're going to be operating more expensive servers just to increase the amount of monuments or the gather rate. This is completely opposite and against what other games in the genre do, like Ark or Conan, and it'd be interesting to see whether or not they go through these plans. This splash page was removed prior to the full launch, so fingers crossed they do go for a more streamlined approach and allow people to customize the server without having to pay even more. At the moment, the servers are pretty vanilla and standard, with wipes happening every month, scheduled to take place every last Thursday of that month. When a wipe happens, your base, everything in your inventory is wiped, it's gone, you have to start all over again. The only thing you keep is your blueprints. There are no solo servers, no duos, no triples. It is full 8-clan servers, and that looks to be the case for a good few months yet. During the beta stage, they did have 3 gun servers which gave you kits of different weapons just to test out and really give the servers a once over. We don't know yet if they're going to be coming back wholesale, but it looks like that kind of stuff may be reserved for community servers. So that means no build servers either. If you want to test your building skills, you're going to have to get a private server. There will be crossplay between Xbox and PlayStation, although there are lots of servers that you can stick just to your own platform. You'll find these servers clearly marked in the server list which ones are crossplay and which ones are not. Be warned that the voice chat difference between the two can sometimes be quite delayed, so if you're playing with your friends on a different console, you may want to think about another voice service like Discord. There is never going to be any PC crossplay ever. These are very different versions of the game. They've categorically stated that there will never be crossplay with PC, not only just because of the difference in the games themselves, but also because of things like keyboard and mouse support. Although many games, particularly on Xbox now, allow you to use keyboard and mouse, you will be banned if you use any third-party software to activate a mouse and keyboard on Rust. Unless that changes or they decide to bring in special ones, they've explicitly said that that's the way they're going with it. They don't want people playing Rust with a keyboard and mouse on console. Rust is roughly 2.5 years behind PC, around late summer 2018. This is a huge amount of content, including all sorts of things like cars, electricity, farming and much more, which I'll go through later on in this video. During that time, PC Rust has received monthly updates, but console won't be getting that same frequency. It looks like they're going to be coming out every 8 to 10 weeks from each other for major content, with some minor updates in between. The first of them major updates is going to be the tech tree being added to the console version. This will allow you to pretty much unlock items whenever you use scrap instead of being lucky and finding the blueprints for them. And just announced before the game's launch, they said they were removing 3 monuments due to performance issues. The water plant, the supermarket and train yard will not be there at launch, and they'll be coming with the tech tree update in 6 to 8 weeks afterwards. Part of this major update also is gestures, something that only recently got added to PC. Not 100% sure if it's going to be exactly the same format, or it may be just some early versions that they had from a few years ago. They've pretty much stated that they're going to group some of these updates more cohesively together. My best example is the horses, which came out at first just horses, then they allowed you to ride them, then they allowed you to put horse armour, and then finally you were able to buy them from the stable. And that all ended up happening over the course of 4 or 5 months. Maybe even longer when you count in the time they added the horses themselves. So given their timeline, they've said the next update afterwards is going to be the Surge update around some point in September, maybe October, that adds power lines, which doesn't look like it's directly lifted from the Rust base game on PC and could be a completely brand new element, or it might be just a bit of a repositioning and a redo of some of the monuments that have already been in the game or were once concepts. Judging by the plans as we know of yet, this might not happen until September or October. Rust has a fully functional electricity system based on the logic system, so you can build traps, operate doorways, switches, lights and all sorts more. You may have seen Rust looking absolutely phenomenal with something called the HDR backpull. It's pretty much a res up of the game's looks and visuals with much more detail on a lot of the assets. It's not simply just adding some fresh 4K textures. They've actually gone in and redid a lot of the model work, and it's taken them nearly 2 years to do this. Meanwhile, Rust on old gen consoles looks like an absolute potato. Well, maybe not that bad, but don't expect maybe any of that kind of content. It will never make it to old gen, and at the best it might be a next gen upgrade in around 2 years time. On a serious note, it does look like they're trying to achieve 30 FPS on Xbox One and PlayStation 4, but it didn't achieve that during the beta. They are promising that it will be locked though in the future, and they're hoping that on Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro it will be 60 FPS. And since there's no word about how it will actually properly go in the future for PlayStation 5, there's no talk yet about what it will look like. It's still just backwards compatible, so your frame rates will be improved, but yeah, no real big caps put into place. It might not even be until 2022 that you see a proper dedicated PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series S and X version. Controversially, Double 11 included 3-day early access for Ultimate and Deluxe editions of the game, giving everyone a head start who picked up them editions. Now, while Rust does wipe on a weekly, bi-weekly or monthly basis, there are lots of servers that keep your blueprints, and so it has given an advantage to certain people. Double 11 have said they're going to make sure that the servers are clearly marked that show players that these servers have been live a while. So your blueprints will roll over as long as you play on the same server and you don't try any different map. You'll keep all your unlocks from the next wipe. And if you don't even know what a blueprint is, don't worry, I got your back a little bit later on. Now, for different parts of the world, you're going to have servers based in EU, America and Oceania, and it does look like in the future they are trying to source some for South America too. Pretty much following the same sort of path that PC has, but again, that may be some time before they get a bit more specific. There's going to be no Rust Plus support at launch, although it might be something they consider, but not again until maybe 2022 at the earliest. The Rust Plus is pretty much a phone app that gets you information. You can talk to your clan, as well as do all sorts of things like check on your base and keep up to date with server announcements. It is a mobile app, but as I said, it's definitely low on the priorities for Double 11. Double 11 have confirmed there are no PvE servers planned. You'll have to wait until the community servers come in. So obviously this is a PvP focused game. There is not really much content, particularly with 2018 Rust, in really playing it on just your own. PC has a big choice in mods and add-ons that help with that, adding old school zombies, more creatures and all sorts of extra items that really can add roleplay elements. But don't expect any of that kind of content until the end of 2022. As part of the pre-orders for console, they listed that you would only gain access to the test servers if you bought some of the more expensive editions of the game. If you bought the base game at its base value, you would not be able to take part in the test servers. Now, test servers are a pretty much mainstay from all survival games on PC, as well as some on console too, and they've always been just free. As long as you bought the game, you will get it. You didn't have to buy more expensive editions. So this has been a big criticism of me and why I've been pretty mad at Double 11 for trying to pull this stuff off. It basically meant that a lot of people ended up buying access or expensive editions so they don't miss out in the future. Now it does look like Double 11 have changed their tune, maybe due to feedback from me and others, and it says that they are going to be opening up the test servers, but maybe for only a small limited time, just to make sure that the numbers can hold it. Usually test servers will go live for maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the full update comes out, and I'm guessing that they will open up for everyone for maybe one weekend just to stress test some stuff. It's still not ideal, but that's the situation as of pretty much launch. These test servers will be expected to go up when the next update hits, which will be that tech tree update in around 6 to 8 weeks after launch. Now I mentioned that blueprints will remain as long as you play on that same server, so anything you find or unlock or research you'll keep over the next wipe. Now that's been the case for PC for years, but they implemented tech tree in January and I think they're going to start changing in the future. But some people haven't had their blueprints wiped for literally over a year, so you get to keep all the stuff that you research. Blueprints you find in barrels and as you progress through the game, or you learn it by researching items at research station. When the server wipes, as long as you play on that same server, you'll still have access to all your recipes. You just need to go and collect the resources again and then go ahead and craft or build them at certain stations. So it does give an advantage to a player if they do stay on that one server and have built themselves up a big collection of blueprints. But there are some servers that wipe the blueprints regularly. You can also chance your luck by going and putting some scrap in a workbench and seeing if you get a random blueprint. You can do this at all the tiers and you may get lucky and get a nice one. Right now the maps are 2.5 kilometers, which is rather small compared to PC, but given that there's only 100 players on the server. Now we know they've got plans to add bigger maps in the future, but we don't know if they're going to be available on old gen. In a recent AMA they stated that it would maybe be next gen to get larger maps like 5k maps. We also know from the server rentals that were leaked from the page during the 3-day early access, they have plans for adding more expense if you want a larger map as a community server. The maps themselves are a choice or selection of seeds. It's not completely procedurally generated. It's going to be from a pool of maybe 4 or 5, and we're hoping that they're going to add more of these as time goes on. The server cap of course is 100. That is much less than it is on PC, where you can have up to 450 players on certain servers. The average on PC is around 250 though, hence why some of these maps may always be a little bit on the small side. There is voice chat enabled but no text box, so you won't be able to chat to your mates by typing, but you will be able to have proximity chat. One thing they do have is a small radial wheel where you can activate and pretty much tell people what you need, whether it's resources, items, or tell them to just go away. As mentioned earlier, there will be the gestures update that will also help with communication if you're not using voice chat. Right now it's proximity based and it doesn't look like it interrupts your party chat. Unless there is a way around that, let me know. The clan size cap is 8. You may find some servers bigger or smaller, but they'll most likely be community ones in the future. Facepunch haven't announced any plans yet for typically solo servers or duos, but that is kind of common on PC, so I fully expect to see them kind of servers added in the future too. Just some point down the line in a good few months. Rust biomes consist of temperate grasslands, you've got forest, hills, desert, snow, and you've got sandy beaches, plus lakes and of course the ocean. The biome conditions need to be paid attention to. If you're in a cold area, you're going to need lots more food, and if you're living in a desert, you're going to need a lot more water. The grassland biome is going to have lots of stuff like hemp, maybe some rocks, barrels, trees for wood, and of course some creatures. The hills are going to have more nodes, sometimes like the stone, sulfur and metal, but you won't find as much hemp or trees in some of these mountainous hilly areas. Forest has lots of trees, of course, duh! But you'll also find mushrooms, rocks and sulfur hidden away. The snow is cold, again, duh! It can reduce health after a while if you're not correctly eating lots of foods or wearing the right gear, especially at night time where temperature drops. You'll find plenty of metal nodes, rocks and sulfur in the cold. At the moment, a lot of the desert regions are spawning on the eastern side of the map, so you're going to have to go across the map to really get to some of these, and this is where you will need a lot more water if you're going to live here. They've got things like cactuses and mushrooms growing. There are also smaller biomes such as lakes and rivers, as I mentioned, where you get more food growing, beaches and swamps, although it does look like the swamps haven't been fully implemented just yet. Only the one with the bandit camp has been added, but there is an additional landmark that will be coming soon, plus of course the oceans all around the map, although it doesn't appear to be any fishing in the game as there is on PC just yet. You will find additional driftwood and floating debris that you can go ahead and get barrel loot from. You can also find underwater secret loot around some of these areas too, although you may need some sort of specialist diving equipment to really make the most of getting it, as well as obviously a boat. You'll hear the word monuments a lot. These are pretty much zones or landmarks that have loot in, as well as special items that you can only get by using green cards. We'll cover that in a bit, but the monuments themselves, some or most of them have radiation around the zone. So you have to be careful, or you have to make sure you've got either a hazmat suit or enough gear and items wearing it, or taking tablets that will give you some anti-radiation protection. Now these monuments range from everything from the dome to the supermarket to the train yard to the waterworks, but as I spoke earlier, some of these monuments have been removed from the beta and won't be making their return until a good few weeks into the game. Some monuments like oil rig and cargo ship, they won't be added until maybe next year. It does look like progress on some of the later ones will be very long, and you can forget things like the train yard and train lines going through the game. That probably won't ever make it to the older gen consoles. But the monuments that are there do offer the best chance to get certain pieces of loot. They'll have a percentage chance of spawning, so you'll find barrels just like you do all over the map, but in these barrels there is more likelihood of getting certain resources. You'll also find stuff in military crates or elite crates in certain locations. Some of the monuments also have either jumping puzzles that you need to be pretty adept at climbing and clambering to get access to some of the doors. Oh, and I nearly done it. Some of these monuments are protected by NPC enemies, whether or not it's just scientists roaming around or actual big huge tanks. There are some monuments like the outpost and the bandit camp that are PvE zones. On console these are the only two zones at the moment, although hopefully later we will have things added like the stables as well as the boat shop. If a player pulls out a weapon here, you will be shot by some of the bandits that guard it or the turrets that guard the outpost, and then you'll have a half an hour cooldown where you won't be able to get your stuff. If you are killed by another player, some player finds a way to do it trollishly, or you even make an accident, then you have to wait for that 30 minutes to go down. If you go anywhere close to it after pulling a weapon out, another 30-minute timer will kick in if you're killed once more. Now these places are good for buying certain items, whether or not you're going to exchange stuff for scrap, buy weapons, or in certain places like Outpost, exchange stuff for resources. There is a gambling wheel that you can partake in with scrap at the bandit camp. Don't expect slot machines or poker tables to come into the game until way into maybe next year, if at all. Some monuments only spawn on larger maps, so if you keep continuously missing stuff like the military tunnels or no oil rig in the future, check to make sure that map can support it. Basically, the smaller the map, the less likelihood is it's going to have every monument, so the bigger the map, the chances are it'll have all of them. Fingers crossed, Double 11 adds the 3.5km maps in the future, and this may indeed have some more of the monuments that have been missing, as well as some bigger ones in the future. As of May and July in Rust on console, the following are here. We have the airfield, the bandit camp, the harbour, the launch site, the lighthouse, outpost, mining outpost, power plant, satellite dish array and the dome. We also have Oxham supermarket, but we are missing the general supermarkets, train yards and the water treatment plant. These are hopefully be added in the future, and so far I've yet to see anything like the junkyard in the game yet. As I mentioned, I fully expect things like the oil rig and maybe the cargo ship not to be added until well into next year. I will circle back to how to activate some of the puzzles in some of these monuments, as well as get hold of the key cards, but I'm saving it for a little bit later on when we talk a little bit more in depth about loot. Rust is a survival game, but the survival elements are pretty light compared to others like Conan or Ark or DayZ, and in this version of Rust the basic requirements are really not that hard to get going. Just simply eat to replenish your food, and that also then replenishes your health, and you get a small adjustment for your health every time you eat something too, and a tiny bit for drinking water. Cooking meat will give you a little bit more health normally when you eat it, and obviously replenish your food a little bit more, and of course there's lots of things like bandages, but there are no healing teas. That is far down the line on PC. Likewise, farming hasn't been implemented on the console version, and that looks like to be a while, so you're going to have to just put up with eating nothing but just pumpkins and corn that you can grow in crop plots, but it isn't the intensive farming system that they added with sprinklers and all the rest of it, or just grow directly in the ground outside your base. So apart from them things, you'll be also eating some chocolate, as well as maybe some apples and stuff like that. There's plenty of wildlife in Rust, including bears, wolves, these are pretty dangerous, and boars. Then you've got things like antelopes and deers, as well as chickens. You will see horses as well, but you can't ride them just yet. You're really killing a lot of these creatures for their hide, as well as obviously their fat. And cooking their meat does give you a nice filling meal in some cases. Oh! Fuck off. It can't get up hills, right? Fuck your mum! Fuck your mum, bear! If you want to be a cannibal, you can also do that too. You can eat other human flesh, but best advised to always cook it first. Resources are obviously important in Rust. The basics are wood. You can find stumps like these that normally give you maybe 50, and you'll find specific rocks that you can pick up that would either be stone, sulfur, or sometimes metal. But not every stone is harvestable in Rust. Where every tree you can get wood from, there are only specific stones that you can actually gather resources from. This is wood. You hit the red X and it will make the resource gathering a little bit quicker. It doesn't give you any more, it just simply speeds the process up every time you correctly hit it. Stone, as I mentioned earlier, you'll find in mountainous areas, hills, and some of the snow biomes. They're shaped like these. You'll notice a little shining gleam on a rock or surface that you can harvest. So try and hit at these precise places, and that's just like hitting an X on a tree. This is what sulfur looks like. It's got a tiny little green or yellow mouldy look to it. To make use out of sulfur, you need to process it, basically cooking it so you can make things like gunpowder. This is a metal node. It's much more brown and beige with little white flecks in it. Again, you're going to need to process this basically in a smelter to get metal fragments or shards. Whenever you're harvesting any stone or metal with certain tools, you will also get higher quality. This is a resource that you can convert into high quality ingots, and you need a bunch of this stuff for maybe high end late game gear. You won't get as much of this as you get metal. In fact, you only get a tiny amount if you're using simply just a rock or a pick, and there are ways that you can get mass amounts of these by using quarries. It's quick and easy to pick up 50 of these resources just lying around. You don't need a tool or a weapon, but it's time consuming. So you are going to need to craft certain things like pickaxes. Otherwise, you can harvest a bunch of these resources just using a rock, but again, you're not going to get as much and it's going to take longer. The better quality your tool, the more of that resource you're also going to get. Hemp you'll find pretty much growing everywhere, and you can plant and grow it yourself. That's these small tiny little more greener bushes that just poke out of the ground. You don't need to harvest hemp, you simply just pick it up. You can grab it even though it's not fully formed yet, maybe a smaller bush, but you just won't get as much hemp from it. You need hemp for bandages, lots of clothing items, and a hell of a lot more, so you're always in need of a good supply of it. Pay attention to the biomes that are listed that have more of the certain resources, and like I said, never pass up the opportunity to grab some of these smaller ones. You find raw oil in these red barrels. You get diesel, and you can also get low grade oil. You need low grade for a whole host of different things, crafting items and stuff. At the moment, the diesel isn't that much use other than maybe utilising it in certain monuments to get resources, but some of the monuments like the excavator are not in the console version and won't be for a while. And then of course you've got the barrels. Now there's different colour barrels. You'll find these beigey ones with lots of rust on them, and then you'll find more bluer versions. They both generally have the same sort of stuff inside it, but one of them has got a little bit easier to harvest than the other. Every barrel that you break will contain some scrap, usually 2 to 5 pieces. This is what you buy items with and trade with at outposts, and is probably the most valuable item you can find because you need it to learn certain blueprints, and you always find usually one component piece or maybe one resource piece too. You'll often find barrels littered across the roads as you traverse the map and at monuments. There are various other containers too, including these crates where again you'll find tools, components as well as scrap. You can also find these smaller cardboard sort of wooden boxes, and again they'll have certain resources in. There are loot tables flying around. You should really look up 2018 loot tables though, as much has changed in years on PC. And you will find food and anti-radiation tablets in some of these food crates. And somewhat surprisingly, you may find more tools in tool crates like these. In monuments and certain places you will find military crates. These are much darker green and they often contain a little bit more valuable resources, scrap or components or blueprints. Now the elite crates you'll only find at certain monuments, behind certain doors, or an oil rig in the future, or by taking out the helicopter and the Bradley. You also get that supply drop there. That comes from a supply chopper that goes around the map periodically at different monuments, and it's drop its payload. It will show up on the map whenever it's been dropped, so it does mean you're more of a target for other players. And once activated, it's going to take 15 minutes before you can access the items inside. But that's where you get the best loot. That's where you'll find certain guns like AKs, as well as rocket launchers and much more. So let's move on to base building. You can pretty much build almost anywhere on the map as long as it's not too close to any of the monuments, including the outpost and bandit camp. For solo players, I've already done a video showing you guys how to live like a swamp rat, and this is one of my favourite spots to build, especially when you're going up against so many bigger crews. The building system is a modular building system, so basically when you've got the components, you will then go ahead and place your item and it will use the resources that you've got in your inventory. You can't just stack 20 foundations like you can in Ark or Conan. You literally have to build with the resources there and then. You'll notice the blueprint outline. That's why the blueprints are called blueprints, because they evolve around the building system. So the first level is Twig. This is not going to keep you protected at all. With a few melee weapons, even like a spear or just a basic axe or pickaxe or even a rock, you can damage some of these. Once you've got more resources like wood and stone, you can start upgrading your base pieces individually so that it becomes even harder to break through. To build, you need a blueprint which you can craft very easily, and you will also need a hammer to upgrade your build pieces. You also need the hammer to remove items. At the moment you can remove things like doors and locks and reposition or replace them with much upgraded parts, but after 10 minutes, once you've placed a building piece down, you won't be able to pick it up any longer, and I don't think you can pick up Twig, not that I've ever really tried. Since it's so low level, I generally just leave it if I made a mistake. You can see there's a build radial dial which lists all the building pieces that you can have and you can craft. You can see you can do all sorts of things like stairs, roof pieces, triangle foundations and much more. If something's orange, it just means you haven't got enough of the resources to craft it. If it's red, you can't place or build there. Once you've built your main structure, as I said, you can start putting things like doorways in and then putting locks, and that will stop players from getting in, but you do need to make sure you've upgraded from Twig to at least wood. Now wood is generally what you'll find a lot from noobs, but it's not always a good idea to go straight for stone and metal, as the upkeep costs are important. I'm going to explain everything you need to know about TCs, but here you can see I'm upgrading from Twig to wood or stone as I made an accident there. Now you can actually upgrade fully straight to metal if you've got loads of metal resources, totally avoiding wood and stone if you really want to. Wood pieces can be broken into using a variety of things like flamethrowers and of course explosives, or picking at them with tools, but you'll have to go through quite a few tools to break into a wooden foundation. Even shotgun shells will also do the trick on wooden structures. Stone bases are pretty much the go-to for a lot of players. They're harder to get into, you will need explosives unless you're going to sit there for years with some pickaxes or tools like a drill. And it's important to note that make sure you don't place the walls the wrong way round. If you rotate walls so the inside is on the outside, it's actually easier to get inside bases. Upgrading to stone means that you're going to have to put more stone in your TC, your tool cupboard, if you want to maintain it and stop it from decaying. After stone, you then have metal and then armoured metal, and these are obviously much harder to break into. You will need explosives or rocket launchers to get into a metal base. The more metal doors that you have, the more that the metal you're going to need for your TC also. Some build pieces you can only get by finding the blueprints from, things like garage doors, so be on the lookout for some of this stuff and make sure you always learn it to carry the blueprint to the next wipe. Now your TC stands for tool cupboard. It's a box that you can craft, it costs 1,000 wood, and this is how you stop your base from decaying. Pretty much you can put a lock on this to stop other players from accessing it quick and easy, and it is the primary way that you'll end up losing your base once players get inside. As soon as it's placed, you can see my base stats, it's saying that I'm decaying. I need to put the required amounts inside to keep this area from other players building too much and to make sure that it's mine. It can only hold raw resources, it won't hold components or tools or weapons. Decaying is an important tactic in the game. Some players run around looking for decaying bases from players that haven't returned, and pay attention to the walls that are going to come down, as they generally will start losing health, so you can break into them a little bit quicker and easier, or waiting for them to disappear completely. You'll find that loot is the last thing to really despawn. Destroying the TC obviously means that things are much more open as well, and you'll be able to place new doorways and locks on a base and effectively lock players out. This is how you can take over someone else's base. So you've got a number of items that you can craft on your person whenever you want, then the rest of the stuff needs to be crafted at workbenches or in the vicinity of one. Normally you have to be either within close range or at least a meter so you're facing the workbench. There's various different tabs where it will show items for quick craft, then you've got base components, then weapons, tools, armour, you get the deal. You've got a timer. Every time you craft something, it can take a phenomenal amount of time. Some things craft in seconds, others take like 20. You can also craft items in bulk, but you are going to have to sit there and wait for them to craft, or use certain things like furnaces to cook certain items. As of right now, be careful with your workbenches. When you place one down, that is it. You're not able to pick them up at the moment. Now, hopefully that will come, as it is the same on PC in future. You don't have to put any of the resources in the workbench. As long as they're on you, you'll be able to craft your item. You'll hear the term components quite a lot in Rust, and these constitute some of the items that you'll find in barrels and crates. Components are literally what you craft and make some of the most valuable gear from. Things like finding thread, pipes, metal blades. Some of these components are specifically used for certain guns and weapons. Components that you don't need, you can go ahead and recycle them at recyclers, which you'll find at different monuments, but the safe ones are at outpost or bandit camp, and these will give you raw resources back, as well as certain extra components that have been built to make certain item. In fact, you can scrap almost anything inside the recycler, whole guns, whole weapons, and it'll give you either components or resources back. Be warned though, players can get in here and take your stuff if you step away from the recycler or you come out of the menu system. So be aware, just in case anyone tries pushing you while you're taking too long looking. The loot is huge. The amount of stuff that could potentially be got from different types of crates is massive. So I won't bore you too much here, but loot crates, barrels respawn just like resources do. Apparently the more players that are on a server, the more chance that some resources will start to spawn. But I've always found that on servers I've played on, that the loot, or the resources especially, is harder to get the more players that are on. As the loot tables are literally lifted from 2018, it's pretty hard to tell exactly how it works. But it does look like the majority of this stuff respawns every sort of 10 to 20 minutes. The exception being anything inside a monument, which can spawn 15 to half an hour. It's all to do whether or not that monument has been left alone or if there's active players around it. That's what's supposed to happen anyway. In terms of loot chances, you'll find lots of loot table websites out there that will list what you can expect from barrels, military crates, how often AKs may spawn on the server, but it's a lot better than you find on games like DayZ. The best loot is in the monuments, in elite crates, and sometimes you'll find military ones too. To gain access to lots of loot in the monuments, you're going to need to use key cards. There's green, blue and red. Sometimes cards need to be got purely just to access other key card rooms, so never pass up the opportunity to get one. You can find green cards on scientists, you can find it at the Oxam or the supermarket, lighthouse and harbour or stores. Blue cards are in rooms that the green cards can open, so normally you might find a blue card at a harbour, and red you'll only find in crates and doors opened with blue doors. Cards have durability, i.e. you can only use them with a certain amount of times, and you often have to power it with electricity too. These are pretty much called the monument puzzles. Sometimes they're jumping like you've been seeing me fail at, other times it's about flicking certain switches in 3 different locations, following the lines back to where the fuse box is, putting a fuse box in that you'll find, and then using the key cards to swipe through. So quite an involved process. So if you ever kill a player and they've got blue or red cards on them, absolutely take that as a priority, as it makes your life a little bit easier going to get them. These do respawn of course in certain locations, and like I said, you might want to reference some different articles from 2018 about exactly where they will spawn, or I will do a proper video showing you where to get them all. So what happens when you die? Well, your body will still be there for a few moments unless it's harvested. Otherwise, you'll have a army little backpack, and this will be there around 30 minutes to an hour. It's not precise as far as I know just yet what build this is, and this has changed a bunch of times. But during the beta and the first days of playing, I definitely had over 30 minutes to go and get my bag. So yeah, I would say at least 35 minutes, maybe more. The map will show where you just last died, but if you keep dying, it will erase the first point where you died. If you keep dying, you'll have multiple backpacks left behind and they'll all have individual timers on. However, if you drop an item directly from your hand, that item might only last around 5 minutes. Anything equipped in your hand when you're killed or when you die, you will drop on the ground. There are of course teams in Rust. You can make your own clan, and obviously you can have up to 8 players. If you want to join another team, you're going to have to leave the one that you're in. But don't worry, your players, your friends can still have access to your base as long as they've authorised themselves on the TC. Although it's a good idea to keep your TC in a locked room that only you know the code for, especially when you're getting to know new players. You can let them into certain parts of your base by giving them codes for certain doors, but always keep the TC somewhere really super safe, or make sure you've got a lock on it with a separate code. Never ever use keys that you can craft in the game, as this will give anyone who grabs hold of that key access to any of the locks. And like I said, make sure that you've authorised your own TC. If you don't, certain traps that you can place sometimes will also shoot you. Just look at your TC, then press the X or the square button to authorise it, and obviously make sure it's got the upkeep as I spoke about earlier. And speaking of traps, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of content missing from PC, including electricity. Now as I said, that's not going to be coming for a good few months yet, until maybe September, October, which means that you don't need electricity for things like traps. If you get yourself a flamethrower trap or a shotgun trap, you can put these in your base and you don't have to worry about powering them, you just need to make sure they've got bullets. Or at the very least, obviously fuel. Likewise, any lighting that you find, it won't need any electricity, they just may need some things like fuel, low grade, put into them. I can speak all day about the content that's not there on the Xbox and PlayStation versions, but I've kind of done that already in a few other videos. But I will say that cars is maybe another component that a lot of people will see. You'll see certain pieces and bobs that will work inside them or in the future, but yeah, they're a long way off. So please don't buy the game if you're expecting to play around in cars. We haven't even got horses with actual proper mounts yet. That's going to be probably a good few months away, and that might be around Christmas time by the way things are going. Research is an important part, and I may have brushed over it a little bit, so I want to make sure I gave it some proper time here. But basically, find stuff out in the world, things like garage doors here. You want them, they're really desirable, and you're lucky to get hold of them. So you want to research them so you can craft them all the time. Once you research something, that's it. You'll remember it always on that server unless they change anything. So it's easy. It's essential that when you get an AK-47, you don't go just on a rampage, you actually bring it back here and go ahead and research it. Even if you haven't got the components to make a new one, it's better to do that and prep for the future. That's why scrap is so useful, because you need to pay for the research in scrap. So taking it from other players or from stuff that you've recycled is pretty much the best way to get hold of it. Now you can use workbenches, there's 3 different levels, 1, 2 and 3, and you can put an amount of scrap in it, usually 75, and it will give you a random blueprint out of the pool. Obviously this is less cost effective way of doing it, so whenever you can, try and get as many barrel loot as you can, take stuff from other bases and go and research it properly. On the last day of wipe, if there's no one to raid, you're pretty safe and secure. You may want to literally go around dismantling anything that will give you scrap just to go and get some random blueprints before everything gets wiped. You won't be able to repair any items you find that you haven't actually learned properly. So although you may find an AK-47, if it's about to lose its durability, then you are going to have to go and actually learn it before you can repair one in the future. Now you can make your own repair bench, or you can just go ahead and use the ones that are at some of these bandit and outpost camps. I've done a guide and shown you guys how to live like a swamp rat. Go and check it out if you're struggling as a solo. You may have heard over the years a little bit about AK recoil, where it has been toned down a little bit, although there is no actual aim assist in Rust just yet. They did say they was going to add it to certain servers, so it should be a sign telling you whether or not that server has aim assist on it or not, but it doesn't look like they've done that at launch. I personally think aim assist is needed. I don't think this game is built very well on older gen consoles, and so anything that helps players deal with lag as well as low FPS is super important to me. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of melee contact, so making sure you've always got a melee weapon is important, and some of the most basic items you will be able to craft without needing any kind of workbenches. So armour is super important, whether or not you're making the most basic of cloth to get going or building your way up to roadside armour. Some of this stuff you are going to need to directly learn once you find it, either put in some elite crates, things like being able to make the heavy plate mask, and even then after that you're going to need certain workbenches to craft some of this stuff like level 2 or possibly even level 3. Armours all come with different values as well, giving you protection against heat, cold, radiation, as well as piercing or animal bites. Also, it's really so important you recognise difference between healing items as well as medical bandages. Now bandages only replenish 5 of your health, but they crucially stop you bleeding. If you don't put a bandage on, you could bleed to death, even if you've got medical syringes, which you do need to learn by finding them and then researching them. So if you ever get injured, always make sure you apply a bandage and then go ahead and use a medical syringe, or do it vice versa as quickly as possible. Food will replenish your health, but it's that bandage that's important, especially if you've been hit multiple times. There's obviously a lot more I could have fitted in, and I've probably missed this up a little bit with certain items that I could have put together or didn't separate enough. You give me some top tips to get started, the basics of Rust, leave them in the comment section, and who knows, maybe I'll do another 101 things you need to know about Rust on console. Rust has been a great experience, albeit marred by certain stuff the devs have done in terms of pre-orders and shenanigans they've got planned for the future in terms of updates. Do not buy this game if you're expecting the PC experience. It is definitely subpar when it comes to that. Even on next gen, where frame rates are much better compared to the potato Xbox and PlayStation 4, I would still say this is a game that you might not want to consider spending a good $50 or $60 on. Not unless you're used to these kinds of games that get better over time, that will get updates, and I do believe they will come good on it. It's just such a shame they haven't managed to get it a bit more up to date like PC has. And the 101 thing you need to know about Rust on console: never absolutely trust anyone, not even friendly looking YouTubers like me. Make sure you shoot me first before you ever become my friend. You know, what's going on? Was you just running around launch site? Because I just ran down there and I totally forgot I didn't have enough anti-radiation. I was like looking for you and shit. I was like, right, I've got to find this dude and then just be lit like that. And then, yeah. Look out for the rest of my guides and tips, and I'll see you at Bags very soon for more survival games, news, guides and opinion. Until next time, laters.